I will pass on the floor to Elena from Ukraine, who will be talking about 1,000 years of cultural heritage and freedom and beauty in Ukraine.
Thank you, Lena. Hello, everybody. Actually, it's not 100 years of freedom and beauty. It's 1,000 years of our path towards freedom and beauty. And I will tell you why. It was and still is the path. I'd like to start with acknowledging that Ukraine is living through an unprecedented, ferocious time of war with Russia. And I think this is important to start any talk about Ukraine right now with this recognition. Why? Because we're still living in a world where freedom of speech in a country with over 100 million people is breached so badly that over 100 million people still believe that there is no war in Ukraine and there is some liberation action going on. And that's why I think it's important to also state that this territory, which is now Ukraine, it has been inhabited for like centuries, and we can think back to the times where Sumerian culture was in place, and we have some carvings in the stone areas which are resembling us of the Sumerian writings, but this was not a state, and we cannot think that back that far away, thinking about the state we're talking about right now. So I will start with Kiev Rus, which was the state which took part, which covered part of Ukraine and part of modern Russia. And the capital was in Kiev, obviously, and it was a pagan society with a bunch of pagan gods, and converted into Christianity in 1900s. And interestingly, the conversion took place by means of studying the religions which existed at the market, so to say, at that time, and choosing the one which would be appropriate for that state. This is a picture of Saint Sophia Cathedral in Kiev, which was built in 11th century, and it shows astonishing mosaics with Virgin Mary there, the one who is kind of protecting people. And if we go further in history, we will see all kinds of other states and all other kinds of rulers on this territory, which is now Ukraine. We've gone through Scandinavian princes, which were told to be invited over to rule Slavic society. And interestingly, I visited the same museum as Rune visited, and Rune mentioned what he was outraged with those drums, which were not in an appropriate manner established and not in an appropriate place. And I was amazed that it was written that that Vikings were trading with Russia in 9th or 8th century, and there was no Russia back then. It was Kiev Rus. So if we're talking about this territory, which is now Ukraine, we can think back to Kiev Rus. Then there were Tatar Mongols who invaded this territory, and afterwards they retreated to some other places. We had the Grand Duchy of Lithuania in this territory and Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. And interestingly, none of them questioned that this territory was Ukraine or that it ever existed. They kind of acknowledged that this territory is Ukraine. And then a little bit to the south, what is being formed in the Ukrainian steppes, those vast plain territories, are the military. Well, you cannot say that it's a republic, but let's say it was a military state formed by Cossacks who were claiming themselves to be free people, and they were military men protecting the borders against all kinds of invasions, including Turks and Tatars. And they were not just a gang of military men. They had a society, they had a rule of law, they had certain traditions, and they were investing into education, into monasteries, and what they did is that they abolished serfdom, which is kind of slavery, which existed in many countries around Ukraine. And around that time, or even earlier, this term, this word Ukraine is brought about. And to some, it means on the verge of something. To some, it means in the country. So basically, this very term contains the word country. And one last thing, which I'm going to tell you from the history, it's that when Cossacks were torn between Polish rule, Russian rule, and invasion from Turks, they thought that it would be a good idea to make a pact with Russia to protect their state, which was a mistake, as we know now. And continuously over the next 100 years, the serfdom, this form of slavery, came back to the Ukrainian land. And now I'm going back to culture, because you can see here this, it's a document which was made up by Cossacks after losing in Poltava battle. I'm sure if there are any Swedish citizens here, they know about this battle. This is when Cossacks made a team with the Swedish king in order to combat Russia. They lost, but they wanted to preserve the rule of law, the ideas of their republic for the future generations. You know, if they were able to reestablish the state. So they made up this document, which is now in Sweden, and it's considered by Ukrainians the first Ukrainian constitution by Philip Orlik. I'm just giving you these facts which are bringing me to the 19th century, when Ukraine already lost its independence and became what comes to us right now as a colony of Russia. And here you can see this painting, which was made by our poet Taras Shevchenko, who is considered a prophet. And why he is considered a prophet? It's because being born as a serf, so he was not free. He was he belonged to a lord, so he was not free to get education, to do whatever he wants with his life. He was supposed to serve from the birth till the end of his life on the lands of a lord. And he had a talent. He had talent to write poems, and obviously had a talent to paint. And I was amazed that he also he was doing watercolors, he was doing engravings, and he was doing like full-scale paintings. But it was okay as soon as he was just a poet and a writer and a painter. But he most of his poems were dedicated to Ukraine. And why he is considered a prophet? It's because his voice was the first among the emerging cultural elite of Ukraine to start saying that Ukraine actually exists, that it was free some time ago. Back then, it was about 100 years of dependence from Russia, of being a colony of Russia. And that was not right for the Tsar of Russia. So he made Shevchenko to go to war forces, and he was sent to Kazakhstan to serve as a military man, and he was deprived of the right to write anything. So as a poet, as a free spirit, as a creative person filled in with many, many talents, he was deprived of the right to create anything. So he was painting. And this painting of his represents a Ukrainian woman who possibly is pregnant. And at the back, you can see a Russian soldier who is leaving her. So she had an affair with him, and he is leaving her. And it's considered to be one of his greatest paintings, and also a metaphor for Ukraine and Russia, for Ukraine being a colony and being left behind and having to deal with her problems. So after Shevchenko, many initiatives started in Ukraine, and we had a plethora of writers coming up to the stage. I wouldn't tell you about them, but I'd like to tell you about this movement, Prosvita movement, of which Lena knows about already. And this is a movement from the 19th century, which started in the west of Ukraine, which was part of Austrian-Hungarian Empire back then. And they were inspired by the philosophers and writers of Enlightenment. And they started forming circles of studying Ukrainian language, Ukrainian songs, myths, traditions, dances even, in order to educate the voters, the future voters of Ukraine, in order to enter Austrian-Hungarian parliament, and to be represented in that parliament in order to be able to influence business community, in order to have the rules which would be beneficial for the Western Ukraine. And also, since the Eastern Ukraine and central part of Ukraine were a part of the Russian Empire, this knowledge from prosvita circles started merging with the east of Ukraine. And it existed for about 70 years, so like one full generation was educated in prosvita, and they reached their goals. So they were presented in parliament. They had cooperatives, businesses established in the west of Ukraine, and they survived through the World War I. They survived through the revolution, but they didn't make it through the Soviet Union when it was stopped. It was abolished and erased in a way. And why it's important to speak about Prosvita now, it's because I belong to a group which was trying to, which is still trying and will try to establish, so to say, Prosvita 2.0 in Ukraine in order to educate our voters and in order to continue processing all the bad past into the brighter future, into freedom and beauty. So after almost 300 years of as a colony, or maybe more than 300 years, it depends how you count that, Ukraine's language was barely lost. We barely lost our self-identity and in a way the sense of worth, which started changing when Ukraine got its independence in early 90s. But actually, we can say that Ukraine as a state has reclaimed its worth and dignity and language and self-identity in 2014, when the first war in Russia started, which has never been ended, and now it's a full-scale war. And I'd like to say that the cultural code, which has been there and which was in the words of our poets, in this Prosvita movement, in all other writers, scientists, and speakers of freedom in Ukraine, I would describe it as freedom of speech and democracy and being part of Europe. That's what we carry inside. And being peaceful warriors, meaning that we fight for our freedom and we protect our territory rather than going out there and occupying someone's country. And there is a tradition of openness towards other cultures and adopting them into Ukrainian culture. And I spoke about this 1,000 years ago, like adopting the religion. But we could also speak about the Enlightenment ideas which were built into Prosvita. And in general, this whole movement of being part of Europe rather than closing down and keeping ourselves to ourselves. And the last piece, we're not only maintaining diversity, but we're actually having this emergent active metamodernity. And this cultural code is being solidified through everything that we are going through right now. But the last piece, which is going on right now and which will obviously continue after the war, it's reclaiming our self-identity. And recently what happened is that one of our cultural representatives, she contacted several museums, Getty Museum and London Museum, and she made a statement that this beautiful painting by Edgar Degas was named by him, by the artist, as Russian dancers, but these women, they're wearing Ukrainian costumes, which is known because this veil, these flowers on the head and everything, all their dresses, that's typical Ukrainian dress. And this is what we are doing right now, like reclaiming back our history and self-identity in order to make a statement to ourselves in the first place and then to the world that this is Ukraine and this is our path towards freedom and beauty. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. Thank you so much. Elena, I was thinking maybe you could tell us a bit about the Prosvita 2.0, as you called it. I know things are in a horrible limbo right now, but what were your plans and what are your plans?
Well, it's better to speak about the situation as it is right now, that we're not stopping our movement and we're reaching out to the high schools, to the folk high schools in Sweden and Denmark. And one initiative is to bring Ukrainian well, yeah, refugees, but from the educational field. Obviously, those would be most probably women, young women, to those schools, so that they both get this refuge and get educated in folk high schools. And we are having like educational webinars together with Scandinavian countries, with journalists, with people from folk high schools, obviously, to tell about our initiative and to get the knowledge on this, establishing this Prosvita 2.0, on establishing building in Ukraine after the war, because when it ends, we would need to rebuild both the infrastructure, but the society as well. And this initiative will be much needed, because the idea was to educate those people who are in the rural area, in the small towns, to educate them to be conscious voters, to be able to build the public society in their areas, and to be able to become subjects of the society, to be making conscious decisions about their life and about how the society shall develop. So we're continuing writing on that on our Facebook page. We're collecting all the knowledge and information which we would need after our victory, after the end of the war.